Welcome to video number 3 for Chapter 36, The Cold War Begins. The Allies agreed that Nazism should be destroyed in Germany, and high-ranking Nazis should be tried and punished for war crimes. So the Nuremberg trials of 1945 and 1946 severely punished 22 top culprits of the Holocaust. America knew that an economically healthy Germany was indispensable to the recovery of all of Europe, but Russia, fearing another blitzkrieg, wanted huge reparation payments from Germany. Germany, like Austria, was divided into 4 occupation zones following the war, each controlled by the Allied powers, minus China. As the U.S. began proposing the idea of a united Germany, and as the Western nations prevented Stalin from getting his reparations for their parts of Germany, it became obvious that Germany would remain indefinitely divided. In 1948, when the Soviet Union choked off all air and railway access to Berlin, located deep in East Germany, they thought that such an act would starve the Allies out, since Berlin itself had been divided into 4 zones as well. However, the Allies organized the massive Berlin airlift to feed the people of Berlin, and in May of 1949, the Soviets stopped their blockade of Berlin. When, in 1946, Stalin used his troops to aid a rebel movement in Iran, Truman protested, and the Soviets backed down. Truman soon adopted the containment policy, crafted by Soviet specialist George Kennan, which stated that firm containment of Soviet expansion would halt communist power. On March 12, 1947, Truman requested that the containment policy be put into action in what would come to be called the Truman Doctrine, $400 million given to help Greece and Turkey from falling into communist hands. The doctrine said that the U.S. would aid any power fighting communist aggression, an idea later criticized because the United States would often give money to dictators fighting communism. In Western Europe, France, and Italy, and Germany, they were all still in terrible shape following World War II. Truman, with the help of Secretary of State George C. Marshall, implemented something called the Marshall Plan, which was a miraculous recovery effort that had Western Europe up and prosperous in no time. This helped in the forming of the European Community. This plan sent $12.5 billion over 4 years to 16 cooperating nations to aid in recovery. At first, Congress didn't want to comply, especially when this sum was added to the $2 billion that the U.S. was already giving to European relief as part of the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration. However, a Soviet-sponsored coup that toppled the government of Czechoslovakia finally awakened the congressmen to their senses, and they passed the plan, not wanting to see other areas fall under communist occupation. Truman also recognized Israel on its birthday, May 14, 1948, despite heavy Arab opposition, and despite the fact that those same Arabs controlled the oil supplies in the Middle East. The 1947 National Security Act created the Department of Defense, which was housed in the Pentagon in Washington and headed by a new cabinet position called the Secretary of Defense, under which served civilian secretaries of the Army, Navy, and Air Force. The National Security Act also formed the National Security Council to advise the President on security matters, and the Central Intelligence Agency, or the CIA, to coordinate the government's foreign fact-gathering or spying initiatives. The Voice of America, a radio broadcast, began beaming in 1948 while Congress resurrected the military draft called the Selective Service System, which redefined many young people's career choices and persuaded them to go to college. In 1948, the U.S. joined Britain, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg to form the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, called NATO. NATO considered an attack on one NATO member an attack on all, despite the U.S.'s policy of traditionally not involving itself in entangling alliances. In response, the USSR formed the Warsaw Pact, which was its own alliance system. NATO's membership grew to 14 with the 1952 admissions of Greece and Turkey, and then to 15 when West Germany joined in 1955. General Douglas MacArthur headed Reconstruction in Japan and tried the top Japanese war criminals, the same as had been done in Germany. He dictated a constitution that was adopted in 1946 and democratized Japan. However, in China, the communist forces led by Mao Zedong defeated the nationalist forces led by Chiang Kai-shek, who then fled to the island of Formosa, or Taiwan, in 1949. With this defeat, 1/4 of the world population plunged under the communist flag. Critics of Truman assailed that he did not support the nationalists enough, but truly, Chiang Kai-shek never had the support of the people to begin with. Then in September of 1949, Truman announced that the Soviets had exploded their first atomic bomb, 3 years before experts thought it was possible, thus eliminating the U.S. monopoly on nuclear weapons. The United States exploded the hydrogen bomb in 1952, and the Soviets followed suit a year later, and this begins the dangerous arms race of the Cold War that will last into the 1980s. And we'll discuss more on the impact and development of the Cold War from the United States point of view in class. This is the Works Cited page. All the images used in this presentation are taken from the public domain.